what if a meme coin, an asset literally famous for having no floor price other than zero, actually had a safety net? What if there was a way to anchor all that speculative energy to something real? That's the big idea we're going to unpack right now. So, to really get it, you've got to see the contrast. On one side, you have your typical meme coin. Its value is pure hype. There's nothing holding it up. When the crowd moves on, the price just evaporates. But on the other side, you have the model for Numis Aeternatus. It's built on a reserve of actual Bitcoin, aiming to create what they call a mathematical floor price. And that brings us to its most fundamental concept, a coin with a floor. The name itself, Aeternitas, is Latin for eternity. And that's not just some clever branding, it's the whole point. The goal is to create a token that doesn't just pump and dump, but actually builds real, lasting value over the long haul. So how do they even do that? Well, it all comes down to this key idea, the floor price. And what's so important here is that this isn't a guess, it's not a hope, it is a hard number. It represents the absolute minimum, the intrinsic value of every single token, and it's calculated directly from the amount of Bitcoin held in a public treasury. It's just cold, hard math. And the math behind it, it's actually beautifully simple. You just take the total value of the Bitcoin in their treasury, they call it the Vault DAO, and you divide it by the number of Numis tokens that are out there in circulation. That's it. That number is the floor price. It's a value anchor for every token. I love this quote because it just perfectly illustrates the whole idea. The floor price is the solid ground, the mathematical reality. The market price you see on an exchange? That's the hot air balloon. Sure, it can fly super high on hype and good vibes, but it's always, always tethered to that ground. In theory, it just can't fall below it. Okay, so a rising floor sounds great, but how do they actually make it rise over time? Well, the system is described as a two-engine machine, with two different parts working together to systematically crank that intrinsic value upward. Engine number one is the Bitcoin accumulator, and this thing is relentless. It's an automated process. Every 12 hours, like clockwork, a few new Numis tokens are sold. The cash from that sale is immediately used to buy TBTC, which is just a tokenized version of Bitcoin, and that Bitcoin goes straight into the reserve vault. It's just this constant, steady stacking of the world's number one digital asset. Now, the second engine, it attacks the problem from a totally different angle. It's a token incinerator. There's an associated group, we'll get to them in a sec, called Torino DAO. They use profits from their own trading to go out and buy Numis tokens right off the open market. And then, poof, they're permanently destroyed, burned, and removed from the supply forever. So when you put these two engines together, you get this structural compression. Think back to that formula, right? Engine 1 is always increasing the top number, the amount of Bitcoin in the vault, and Engine 2 is always decreasing the bottom number, the total number of tokens. Both engines are pushing from opposite directions, and both are designed to do one thing, push that floor price up. So, who is this Torino DAO? Who's running Engine 2 and making all the big calls? Well, in the wild, chaotic world of meme coins, Torino DAO is positioned to be the, quote, adult in the room, a formal governing body that brings some real structure and strategy to the table. And the way they're set up is really key here. So, Torino DAO is technically its own separate project, but it holds the voting keys to the Numis Bitcoin Vault. And here's the kicker. Many of its members are also huge Numis holders themselves. This creates this incredible alignment of incentives. You get the disciplined, formal structure of the DAO working for the benefit of the entire Numis ecosystem. And their job description is pretty significant. They govern the vault, making the big strategic calls on how to use that Bitcoin reserve. They're the ones who actually execute the buy and burns. They manage their own treasury to fund those burns, and they're in charge of the long-term roadmap, things like getting listed on new exchanges. This all leads to a really important question. How is this whole system supposed to hold up in the real world with all its crazy volatility? Well, the entire model is designed with one goal in mind, to be resilient, whether we're in a raging bull market or a brutal bear market. And this is where the design gets pretty clever. During a bear market, when Bitcoin is cheap, that accumulator engine acts like a sponge, just soaking up more and more Bitcoin for every dollar it spends. This means the floor price can actually keep rising, even when the overall market sentiment is in the gutter. And then in a bull market, the value of the Bitcoin they already have skyrockets, and that increasing scarcity from the token burns just amplifies all the gains. So, to wrap it all up, this table really lays out the whole story. Your typical meme coin, no intrinsic value, chaotic governance, and totally vulnerable to market swings. The Numis model, on the other hand, is aiming for a real Bitcoin-backed value, a constantly shrinking supply, formal governance, and a structure that's designed from the ground up to be anchored and resilient. Which leaves us with the big final question. Is this whole model, with its interconnected DAOs, its automated engines, its mathematical floors, is this the next evolution for meme coins, a way to add real substance to an otherwise speculative asset class? Or is it maybe just a more complicated machine in an already ridiculously complicated space? That's the question this whole experiment is out to answer.